morning, y'all. Well, y'all got quiet on your own today. Hope everybody's doing well. Quick shout out to Sarah and Austin Poole, who repaired my podium up here. It no longer wobbles terribly, and it is no longer held together by electrical tape. So, feel great about that. As Corey mentioned earlier in the announcements, we are getting a new roof. Aren't y'all excited about that? I also want to say Corey referred to me as Pastor LeRoy. I felt like I got at first it was Mr. LeRoy, then it was Pastor LeRoy. I felt like I got a promotion there somehow. But we're getting a new roof. Tomorrow the work starts on the roof. I say we have church on the roof next Sunday. Morgan's not here to tell us we can't do that today, so y'all forgive, my voice is still kind of coming back, so I have a cough drop in. But we are going to continue in our sermon series on the Psalms of David this morning, and we're going to read from Psalm 34 just here in a moment. Nia, was that planned for y'all to read Psalm 34, or was that after you found out that I was preaching? So, okay, cool. It's still good. It's still good. So Psalm 34 is an acrostic poem comprised of 6 stanzas. Each verse in the original Hebrew begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That's what makes it an acrostic. The occasion for the writing of this psalm is given to us from the outset, which we're not actually going to read. But, as we were talking last week about Psalm 27, sometimes we have some idea of what's going on in David's life when he writes the Psalms, and sometimes we don't. And we're actually given a very clear indication. We're told what was going on when David prayed this prayer in Psalm 34 that led, the prayer that led to the writing of Psalm 34. This is a psalm of deliverance, which was originally prayed by David as he takes refuge with the Philistines, as he is on the run once again from King Saul. This particular story, by the way, if you want to go back and read it, is found in 1 Samuel chapter 21. So once again, King Saul, as we talked last week, becomes enraged with David. He is enraged with David because Yahweh has not only chosen David over Saul, but Yahweh has also chosen David over his son, Jonathan. And Jonathan, by the way, is cool with that because him and David are best friends. But this enrages Saul. And as is par for the course, Saul goes and gets his trusty spear and proceeds to start throwing the spear at David. Fortunately, apparently, Saul didn't have very good aim because he never actually hit David, but he likes to throw the spear at David. So David then feels compelled to run for his life, and it says David, he kind of grabs a sword and he runs. And he ends up in this city called Gath, which was a Philistine city. I want y'all to think about the city of Gath. Think if you've heard something about that before. Because there is something about this city. David has history with this particular city of the Philistines because it was the home of Goliath, whom David had slain with his slingshot. David's a lot better with his slingshot than Saul is with his spear. So here is David essentially stepping onto the front porch of his enemy, but he's on the run from Saul, so he has nowhere else to go. He ends up in this city of Gath, the city of Goliath, whom he has slain. And if David's situation were not precarious enough, he is carrying the very sword that he stole from Goliath. The very same sword, mind you, that he used to cut off Goliath's head. You almost think at this point that David would have been better off taking his chances with King Saul and his wobbly spear. As fate would have it, David's reputation precedes him. He's hoping that he can hide out. He's hoping that the people in Gath won't recognize him, won't know who he is. But word soon gets out that this is the famous David, who has proven to be, I'll get that later, who has proven to be such a mighty warrior. And of course, they bring this to the attention of the king of Gath. Say, this is David. I'm not sure if they remembered that he's the one that killed Goliath. About 10 years had passed since then. But they're like, this is the guy from Israel. This is our enemy. He's this mighty warrior. And now David is in trouble. He's in the hands of his enemies, and his cover is blown. So David does what any sane person would do in this situation. He pretends to be crazy. I like David's approach here. He starts scribbling in the dirt and foaming at the mouth and allowing his drool to drip down his beard. This is after the people bring him in and say, this is the guy, to the king of Gath. This is the guy. This is our enemy. When the king of Gath sees this, he has an epic response, a great one-liner. He looks at David foaming at the mouth, and then he looks at the people who brought him in, and he says, do I have a shortage of crazy people? Am I so short on crazy people that you felt the need to bring me one more? Apparently there were a lot of crazy people in Gath. I've got enough crazy people as it is, he says, so he sends David out, which of course is exactly what David wanted. David is allowed to leave in peace. So that is the context out of which this psalm, Psalm 34, this prayer arose. As I mentioned, this psalm consists of 6 stanzas. For our purposes this morning, we're only going to focus on 3 of those 6 stanzas, but my hope is that this week, maybe in your house churches, or maybe on your own, you can go back and read through the entire 6 stanzas of Psalm 34. This, by the way, is my favorite psalm. Anybody have a favorite psalm? You should have a favorite psalm. Psalm 34 is my favorite. Tell y'all a quick story about this. So several years ago, I was an assistant pastor at a church, and we had this, let's see, how should I describe him? This elderly, eccentric man in our church. And you never knew what he was going to say. So one Sunday morning before church, we're kind of standing out in the lobby, and he comes up to me and he grabs me by both shoulders and he looks me dead in the eye and he says, Psalm 25. There was no context. And I was feeling like y'all, like, what is happening? I didn't know what was going on. He just looks me dead in the eye and says, Psalm 25. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm like, what is that? What are we doing here? And so I think, okay, maybe he's telling me his favorite psalm, and then I'm supposed to tell him my favorite psalm. So he says Psalm 25, and I raise him Psalm 34. And then he gets this perplexed, and I dare say slightly angry look in his eyes. And he continues to grab me by the shoulder, and he goes, Psalm 25. And I was like, oh, okay. So not only is he telling me his favorite psalm, he's telling me my favorite psalm as well. Psalm 25. Sorry. Okay. So Psalm 34, the first stanza that we're going to read through is beginning in verse 4, which Nia read for us earlier, verses 4 through 7. It says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he rescued me from all of my fears. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces will never be ashamed. This wretched man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he rescues them. So even though David had escaped from the king of Gath by pretending to be unhinged, he yet gives credit to Yahweh for delivering him. So this is a psalm of deliverance and protection. And his tone in these first few verses, especially in verses 4 through 7, is a celebratory tone. In verse 7, David gets more specific about the protection that God provides. Here, David mentions the angel of the Lord. Y'all say the angel of the Lord. In Hebrew, the term is Malek Yahweh. Malek Yahweh, which literally translates messenger of Yahweh. And according to David, this messenger of Yahweh encamps around those who fear him. Already in that statement, we see something very interesting about the angel of the Lord, which is that he is sometimes, but not always, equated with Yahweh himself. It can be very confusing. This character, this entity, is commonly referred to and commonly referenced throughout the Old Testament. There are a bunch of examples where we see the angel of the Lord show up and speak to somebody, and again, sometimes he's addressing himself as the angel of the Lord, but sometimes as Yahweh himself. We're just going to look into a couple of examples this morning. The first, the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar. Hagar is the servant of Abraham and Sarah and the mother of Ishmael. Hagar is mistreated, dare we say even abused, by Abraham and Sarah. And she is essentially sent out into the desert to die. But the angel of the Lord appears to her. And when the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar with her son Ishmael, he blesses her and he assures her that her descendants too, so not just the descendants of Abraham and Sarah, but that her descendants too will be blessed and multiplied. Now, in her response, Hagar states, "I have seen the Lord." Or literally what she says is, "I have seen the one who sees me." So she has this encounter with the angel of the Lord, but her response is, "I have seen Yahweh. I have seen the one who sees me." So, the question is, did she see the Lord? Or did she see the angel of the Lord? Kind of both. Something similar happens to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. It says that the angel of the Lord appears to Moses in the burning bush and identifies himself as the angel of the Lord. But then, as the angel of the Lord is speaking, he identifies himself as, quote, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So again, we have this sort of confusing dynamic going on with the angel of the Lord, that he sometimes identifies himself as a messenger of Yahweh, but then sometimes it's almost like he slips up and identifies himself as Yahweh himself. Before we go any further, let me say this. When it comes to Yahweh, every revelation is a limitation. Every revelation is a limitation. Yahweh is transcendent, and as such, could never fully reveal himself to finite creatures such as ourselves. In other words, if Yahweh were to fully reveal himself to us, not only could we not comprehend it, we couldn't handle it. And so whenever Yahweh chooses to reveal himself, which he does on his own terms because he loves us and he wants to have connection with us, he wants to have a relationship with us, but he understands our finite nature. He understands that we're made from the dust. So when he reveals himself, he has to filter. Y'all with me? He has to filter. He has to edit. He has to limit. He can't give us all of it because we can't handle all of it. Even Jesus is not a comprehensive revelation of Yahweh. Remember, in Philippians 2, it says that Jesus had to, quote, empty himself. He had to empty himself in order to take on flesh. When it comes to Yahweh, Jesus doesn't reveal all there is to know. Y'all getting this? He reveals all we need to know. He essentially reveals all that we can handle of Yahweh. Now that we're talking about Jesus, is the angel of the Lord Jesus? I'm going to grab a tissue while y'all think about that. Is the angel of the Lord Jesus? As we're talking about the different characteristics of the angel of the Lord, it kind of sounds like Jesus, does it not? Are these, I'm going to teach some of y'all may know this word, but I'm going to teach some of y'all a new word today. Are these pre-incarnate manifestations of Jesus known as Christophanies? A Christophany is a pre-incarnate, in other words, before he was born, before Jesus came in the flesh, a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. I won't make y'all vote, but y'all have an idea of whether or not you think this is Jesus. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I have no idea if this is Jesus or not. I have wrestled, I got a little sidetracked this week and wrestled way too much with this. I don't know if this is Jesus or not. And in all honesty, part of my hesitation in going out on a limb is that I kind of don't want to tread on the mystery here. But with that said, here are two really good arguments for it being Jesus, because there are plenty of people smarter than me who know more than I do who think this is Jesus. Okay? So if you want to go that route, I'm going to give you some ammunition. The first reason people give is this. There are those who will proclaim that anytime Yahweh chooses to manifest himself in the flesh, it's always Jesus. And there is something bodily about the angel of the Lord, right? And the two examples that we read might not be the best. I mean, there are times where this is clearly a person. There is a body involved. And so there are those who say, yes, anytime Yahweh manifests himself in the flesh, whether it's before the incarnation or at the incarnation, it's always Jesus. The thought behind this argument is that divinity made manifest in human flesh is the very nature of Jesus. And again, I can't necessarily argue with that. The other reason that people give, this is very intriguing to me, okay? The other reason that people give that say this is the angel of the Lord is there are zero mentions of the angel of the Lord after the birth of Jesus. It's like Clark Kent and Superman. You never see him in the same room at the same time. So this is kind of what's going on. People think that this is the angel of the Lord, that the angel of the Lord is Jesus because he doesn't appear after the incarnation, which could be, I don't know if it is or not, but that definitely could be an indication that they are the same person. Can I give y'all one more reason why people say? This is my reason. This is going to be weird. It doesn't hold as much weight as the first two. So one of the times that the angel of the Lord appears is to Balaam. Remember, Balaam's riding on the donkey, and this is a story where God opens the donkey's mouth. The donkey sees the angel of the Lord, but Balaam does not. And so the donkey is smart. The donkey's like, dude, I'm not walking that way. The angel of the Lord's standing over there. And so he starts zigzagging. And Balaam starts hitting the donkey. And when the angel of the Lord finally reveals himself to Balaam and talks to Balaam, the first thing that he does is rebuke him for hitting the donkey. He's like, dude, why? The donkey didn't do anything. Why are you hitting the donkey? I don't know. That seems like a very Jesus-y thing to say. Does it not? Of all the business that he has to take care of with Balaam, it's like, first thing first, quit hitting the donkey. The donkey did not bother you. The good news is that whether you see this as Jesus or not, we have the promise that Yahweh has ways of protecting us. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. As it reads from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 54, verse 17, no weapon formed against you shall succeed, and you will condemn every tongue that accuses you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication is from me, declares Yahweh. Move on to the next stanza that we're going to read from is going to be verses 11 through 14. Beginning in verse 11, it says, "Come, you children, and listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the person who desires life and loves length of days, that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it." In this stanza of Psalm 34, we see the connection between the fear of Yahweh and length of days. Fear of the Lord leads us to be mindful with our words, and being mindful with our words, according to verse 13, as amazing of a claim as this is, according to verse 13, being mindful with our words, watching what comes out of our mouth, watching how we use our tongue can actually increase our lifespan. The fear of the Lord is rooted in the awareness that God is not one of us. Think about that for a moment. God is not one of us. Though he makes himself relatable to us out of his kindness and his goodwill, though he communicates with us, he is not bound by any of the limitations that mark us as human beings. In that sense, God is not one of us. He alone is uncreated. Nobody else can say that. He alone is without beginning or end. Because he is the root of all things, he will never be in a position where he owes anybody anything. Yahweh sees what we do. This is kind of scary. He sees what we do, and he knows why we do what we do. He is merciful, and he is demanding in equal measure. This is what it means to fear the Lord. When we begin to understand this about God, we will become more inclined to obey him. We will become more inclined to honor him in how we live and in how we speak. Our words will become more life-giving. When you think about the fact that God hears everything you say and he knows your motive for saying it, and you're going to have to give account for what you say, you're going to start watching what you say. So as our fear of the Lord increases, our words become more life-giving. And even though I do not necessarily subscribe to name it and claim it theology, there is a connection between how we talk and how we feel. There is a connection between speaking life with your tongue and generating life and experiencing life and health and vitality. There is a connection in those things. And so he is not just telling us in this psalm to watch what we say. What he is saying is we need to become more fearful of the Lord in a good way, to stand in awe of him and to recognize his transcendence and to recognize he is constantly watching us. And going back to what I said earlier, as much as we want to emphasize his mercy, and I would never want to downplay the mercy of God, please remember that he is just as demanding as he is merciful. He gives everything and he demands everything. Okay. Everybody still good? Okay. Y'all didn't like that one as much as you did the first one. Okay, the last stanza that we're going to read from is verses 15 through 18, which is the very next stanza that comes in this psalm. And remember, this is all, even though we're reading these as separate stanzas, this is all part of the same prayer, thanking God for his protection, thanking God for his deliverance. Beginning in verse 15, he says, "The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears are toward their cry for help. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to eliminate even the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears, and he rescues them from all of their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit." So 2 weeks ago, I was supposed to preach a sermon on being near to the brokenhearted, but I got bronchitis. I didn't know that Clay was just recovering from bronchitis. When I texted him and asked him if he could preach for me, and he did a wonderful job preaching on that. But I had this sermon all ready to go, and now I'm going to give y'all part of it. Thought you were getting out of it, but you didn't. So I would like to focus especially on verse 18, which declares that the Lord, speaking again of Yahweh, is near to the brokenhearted. Now think about this. This very same Yahweh that we just talked about, whose presence permeates the cosmos, who is everywhere, who knows everything, who hears every word, who sees every thought, he yet still chooses who he is close to. He decides who he draws near to. And what this psalm is telling us, and what we see over and over again throughout Scripture, is that he has a certain affinity for the broken, for the outcast, for the mistreated. This is part of the reason why he follows Hagar out into the desert. He loves the mistreated, the devalued, the overlooked. Those are his favorites. This divine preference for the broken is clearly illustrated in the life of Jesus. When you think about Jesus and how he lived his life and the short amount of time that he knew he had to be really specific about who he spent his time with, because there wasn't any time to waste. And Jesus could choose to hang out with whoever he wanted to hang out with. And who did Jesus choose? Prostitutes, tax collectors, people with leprosy, Samaritans, people with demonic possession. These were the people he wanted to spend his limited time with on earth. He loved them, he embraced them, and he brought them into the center of the circle. He didn't just include them, he brought them to the center of the circle. And this part is important. There was nothing random about who Jesus chose to spend his time with. There are existential implications. Y'all say existential implications. Wasn't that fun? Don't you feel smart saying that word? There are existential implications to his choice of friends, which I'll do my best that I can to briefly articulate. Those existential implications, look, I can't even say it, for why he chose to spend his time with outcasts. Through his life, through his death, and through his resurrection, Jesus undid every obstacle that ever stood between you and God. And he made it possible for you to experience not just forgiveness, not just redemption, but union with God. All of these obstacles that Jesus overcame were all manifestations of death which entered the world through our distrust and disobedience. All of these obstacles are broken down by the cross. And we celebrate that. And we present that as the gospel. That all of these things that stood as barriers between us and God are completely undone by the finished work of Jesus. But don't forget, Jesus did not just eliminate the obstacles that stood between you and God. He also eliminated every obstacle that stood between you and other people. The barriers that once kept us divided from each other have been brought down by Jesus. If there's a barrier that's standing between you and somebody else, it's because you rebuilt what Jesus tore down. Jesus foreshadowed this finished work by bringing all types of people to the table, with the disenfranchised and the devalued taking the place of honor. Jesus doesn't want anyone to be left out. Therefore, those who are most likely to be left out are given preferential treatment. When I was a kid, I don't know about y'all, but when I was a kid and we would go outside for recess, we would play kickball, okay? And you'd have kickball captains, and you just did not want to get picked last. You also didn't want to get picked first because there's a little pressure there, but somewhere in between first and last. I've always thought that Jesus would be the worst kickball captain ever. Because Jesus is going to pick first. Like, he's not just going to say, hey, I'm going to keep my eye on this kid over here, who's probably still going to be around, third or fourth pick. I'm going with him first. Because he doesn't want them to be left out. So he's making sure that the ones most likely to be left out are given preferential treatment, favoritism. What does this mean for us? By entrusting us with his Spirit, Jesus also entrusted us with his mission. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 is talking about the ministry of reconciliation and the work of reconciliation that Jesus has accomplished on the cross. But it says after he accomplished this work, he has now entrusted us with the ministry of reconciliation. That this is now our task. To be ministers of reconciliation. That is the only plausible, logical response for someone who has experienced reconciliation with God. Is that they would be driven to experience reconciliation with other people. So let me ask you this. Who are the people who might feel like they don't belong in our society? You don't have to answer out loud, but I want us to actually take a moment to conjure an image. Who do you think are the people who might feel like they don't belong in our society? Anybody have some faces? Anybody have some ideas? Raise your hand if you have an idea. Okay, good. So hold that image in your mind. Hold that image in your mind of that person who might feel like they don't belong in our society. And let me ask you this question. Would they feel the same way here? Would they feel like they don't belong here? Would they feel the same resistance that they experience out in society in here? Because if they would, something's not right. And that needs to change. I want to close our time by reading a quote from a man by the name of Gustavo Gutierrez, who wrote a famous work called A Theology of Liberation. And as I read this, you can continue to think about the individuals, the brokenhearted, the outcast. We have to do this work of sometimes of contextualizing the ministry of Jesus. Now, sometimes we want to contextualize because we want to get out of what he actually called us to do. And sometimes Jesus just meant exactly what he said. But in this situation, when you look at who Jesus who Jesus preferred. And I know we don't like those ideas, but if somebody's not at risk to be left out, Jesus is not going to have to spend as much time making sure they feel included. Does that make sense? So that's what I mean by preferential treatment. When we look at who Jesus spent his time with, who Jesus embraced, who Jesus brought into the center of the circle. Again, we've named them already: the tax collectors, the lepers, the Samaritans, Gentiles even. People who are out on the fringe, people who are left out. That list is not going to look exactly the same in America in 2025. So that's where we have to look and say, who are those people now? And how can we work to bring them into the center of the circle? Gustavo Gutierrez says this: the freedom to which we are called presupposes going out of oneself, the breaking down of our selfishness and of all of the structures that support our selfishness. The foundation of this freedom is openness to others. The fullness of liberation, a free gift from Christ, is communion with God and with other people. My hope and my prayer, as we've spent a little bit of time in this psalm of deliverance and protection, and kind of as I was praying this morning on my way here, my prayer really, y'all, is that God somehow, some way would convey a sense of safety to us. That we would actually feel as safe as we are. That we would feel as protected by Yahweh as we are protected by Yahweh. Because once we begin to experience this safety, once we begin to experience this deliverance and this protection that is ours in Yahweh, then and only then will we feel safe enough to open our hands and reach out to other people who might otherwise threaten us, who we might otherwise be afraid of reaching out to. But because of the safety and the protection and the deliverance that is offered us in Yahweh, how can we do anything other than seek to include those who are left out? This is the work of reconciliation, and God will not rest until all of the pieces are brought back together and we have a divinely ordained role to play in that process. I'm going to ask you now to stand, if you will. And we're going to go in a second into a time of prayer and communion. And, of course, the altar will be open. People will be at the sides if you want someone to pray with you, and communion stations at either side as well. But I want for you to take a moment to reflect on these questions. What has God delivered you from? Actually take a moment and think about the things, the situations, the oppression, maybe the toxic relationships. What has God delivered you from? What has God protected you from? In what ways has He protected you? One of the things I think about is we can name so many different things that God has protected us from, but y'all, there are so many things that God spared us from that we never even knew. We never even saw coming, but He still protected us. What has He protected you from? How has He brought you through? How does He want to use you to bring someone else through? Receive now this invitation to Holy Communion. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all who are weary and whose load is heavy, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus also said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." And so now, draw near in faith. Receive the body of our Lord Jesus Christ, which was given for you, and receive his blood, which was shed for you and for many, and feed upon him in your hearts by faith and with thanksgiving. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are those who find refuge in him.